Okay, honors biology. This is Mrs. Kozian, and this is your first set of video notes. I'm re-recording these from the ones that we did last week because we had some terrible feedback in the background, so I'm re-recording them. If you will remember, last week we want to make sure that you guys are taking Cornell notes. You will take your sheet of paper and begin by just dividing it with about a 2.5 inch margin on the left-hand side. The actual notes that you will be writing will be in the middle section, and every 2 to 3 slides, please stop and see if there's any questions that you have or main ideas that you could place in the cues part. Do not do the summary yet. You will do those when you are completely finished with the notes. Okay, the title on the top of this, please write Introduction to Honors Biology. And this is Video 1, What is Science? What is science? Science is the body of knowledge that scientists have built up after years of questioning, researching, experimenting, analyzing, and challenging the world around them. Science is always changing. It is a fluid process. Biology is a science that would go through this ever-changing process in order to understand the living world. Scientists never stop learning, never stop trying to build on the ideas that they've come up with. Okay, now in your notes, what I would recommend that you do is listen to my explanation first of the definition of science, and then start to write down what you think should go there. Then listen to my explanation of what we call pseudoscience, and then write down. I would paraphrase for this one. You are more than welcome to write down the full amount, all the terms that are on the slide, but for something like this, I would recommend that you try to paraphrase or summarize. Okay, what is science? Now, these are all truths about science. Its goal is to understand the natural world and to make useful predictions out of those understanding. It's always very organized, and it wants to use evidence to learn about the natural world. And that evidence usually comes about through data, which we can then come up with conclusions. It's a body of knowledge that is built up after years of using the process. And again, remember, it's always changing. The way that I'm learning biology here as an adult is different from some of the information that I probably learned when I was your age, which was many, many moons ago. What science is not? The opposite of science is called pseudoscience. And that would be an unorganized, which would what the word haphazard mean, an unorganized way to come up with conclusions about the non-natural world. It's not often evidence-based, and it usually doesn't include much data or facts. Examples of some things that you guys might see: pseudoscience. You might see some investigations on, there's a lot of shows on TLC and the Discovery Channel now, looking at like ghost hunters and looking for evidence of Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. Not a lot of data backing that stuff up. Traits of a great scientist. First of all, a great scientist is always looking to improve on the data that they have. Scientists are skeptics. They question both existing and new ideas, and not just their own ideas. Think of the term peer review. That is something that all scientists experience when they're bringing about new ideas and data and research. Scientists always evaluate and revise their ideas for strengths and weaknesses, but a good scientist also recognizes their limits, both monetarily and ethically. Where does what are my capabilities with this experiment? So a scientist recognizes what they're able to do and what they can control. All right, we have 3 important scientists on this slide. You're gonna have 3 on the next one. The first one, Aristotle. Aristotle was one of the first scientists to talk about the idea of spontaneous generation, or life arriving from non-life. We will also talk through many of these scientists about how we got the first really documented controlled experiments where scientists disproved the idea of spontaneous generation. There's a great example of a recipe for spontaneous generation in your book. We'll have to look through that. I think it's about, they said 400 years old, if I remember correctly from the book. It was a recipe for how to grow bees when people still believed in spontaneous generation. They didn't really understand the microbiology of reproduction. Anyways, you guys should take a look at that. It's a recipe for how to create bees, and it involves, I think, like a dead bull and putting something in a shed, and then you'll have bees. It's really pretty interesting. So Aristotle was one of the first scientists who looked into that. Francisco Redi was the first scientist who really was documented as proposing that life only came from other life, or that spontaneous generation was not true. And he set up a great experiment looking at where do maggots come from. We will talk more about that and how Redi was trying to create one of the first controlled experiments. Anton van Leeuwenhoek was one of the first to see cells, and we will talk about why he called them cells. Created one of the first microscopes. Wasn't exactly sure if they were alive or not. Okay, 3 more. John Needham argued that spontaneous generation could occur with the right conditions. He used a demonstration with gravy, but he did not do, it wasn't a very controlled experiment. The experiment that we'll talk about with him is a great example of not controlling all the variables, or not looking at what's your independent, dependent, and control variables, and we will talk about those in your next video. Spallanzani, another, used the work of Needham and Redi and found that non-living gravy did not produce living organisms. So he took what Needham had used and just improved on it and created a more controlled experiment. The last scientist for you is Louis Pasteur. If you have ever heard of pasteurization, Louis Pasteur is the one who is responsible for starting that. We all live through pasteurization. Pasteurized milk, we have pasteurized anything that you get, like juice or soda or anything that's a sealed liquid. It's all pasteurized on our shelves in the grocery store. He absolutely settled the debate about life not being spontaneously generated with this really cool, it was a well-designed experiment. Anyways, I'll show you more later about exactly what it looked like. But it was very well controlled and very well designed. We'll show you the special flask that he created. And let's see. Okay, last part. Take time to look at these 3 questions and think about how your science class will be different from a 7th grade science class. Think about how science might be different from other academic classes, and also explain the contributions of the 6 major biologists that we talked about. That is the end of video 1.